I edited my last video because it was an interpretation of a mistranslation. The redundancies were removed in favor of preserving the only information that mattered anyways, which was the excellent demonstration by DJ Thed. He proved without a doubt that the Pokemon models found in Pokemon Let's Go for the Nintendo Switch are the exact same as the Pokemon models in the 3DS games. The models are already on the Switch. Now I'm just going to come out and say it. The models found in Sword and Shield are also the exact same as the models found in the 3DS games. Everyone and their mother all agreed the models were the same. Not a single person would refute this fact. The only reason people are changing their narrative now is due to an interview featuring Ohmori, the director for Sword and Shield, making a statement in a Famitsu article where he claims they had to make the Pokemon models from scratch, even though everything revealed up to this point completely contradicts this statement. This video will prove that the statement is a lie, or it will expose Game Freak's unprecedented incompetence should the statement actually be proven true upon release. It's a lose-lose scenario for Game Freak. A Reddit user named Sleated released a proper translation just a few hours after I published my last video. He paid over $50 to get the statement professionally translated. It is the only translation I've seen so far that preserves the entire context and removes the ambiguity of the word model. Let's take a look. The interviewer starts off by asking Masuda and Ohmori about the Pokemon and how much work is involved with including them in Sword and Shield. Masuda reaffirms his stance on quality over quantity, and what Ohmori says next is where the controversy begins. He states, quote, "Masuda and I had discussion after discussion about the issue. Even at the point when we were making Pokemon Sun and Moon, it was already practically very difficult to bring all Pokemon along into the game. But with the change in hardware to the Nintendo Switch and needing to redo the models again from scratch, we had to make a decision." The word model in this context is definitely referring to the Pokemon, more specifically the older Pokemon. Ohmori also conveniently omits any reason behind the decision to waste valuable time and resources to recreate models that look the exact same as models that they already have. With all that being said, let's get into proving the lie or exposing the gross incompetence of Game Freak. The Pokemon models are easily portable. There are many examples to prove this point. The models can be found on the 3DS, on cell phones, on anyone's computer, in an arcade machine in Ga Ole, and yes, the models have already been proven to be successfully ported on the Nintendo Switch. People then begin to blame Sword and Shield as the reason why the models are rendered unusable. Allow me to introduce you to the concept known as conversion. 3D models are also convertible. I'll walk you through an example to prove my point. I have every single model, texture, and animation of every single Pokemon from Pokemon Sun and Moon ported onto my computer. I also have two different model viewing software that we will be using for this demonstration, Ohana 3DS and Spica. Let's assume that Ohana is Pokemon Let's Go, and let's treat Spica as Sword and Shield. Let's also assume that instead of those two games supporting the same type of models between them, Game Freak has, for some reason, decided they want to make the two Pokemon titles on the same console support different file types. So let's go into Let's Go and load up a Pikachu model with a file format of .bin. As you can see, it loads up Pikachu with no problem. Now let's try and load up that exact same Pikachu model into Pokemon Sword and Shield. It gives us an unsupported file format error, which means it doesn't support .bin. Does this mean we just give up because now every model is rendered unusable and we should get to work on making them from scratch again? Of course not. We can simply convert the model. Let's go back into Let's Go and convert the model by exporting it as a different file format. Let's say that Sword and Shield supports the SMD format. We'll make a new folder titled Sword and Shield so we can easily locate our converted model. Let's go back into Sword and Shield and click open. Let's look for the Sword and Shield folder where we put our converted model, and BAM! It worked. The model from Let's Go has been successfully converted, exported, and then imported into Sword and Shield. Both models are the exact same, one was just converted from the other. We didn't need to remake it from scratch because 3D models can be easily converted. If I'm able to convert Game Freak's Pokemon models in my home on my own personal computer, I'm assuming Game Freak and their team of professionals can do the exact same thing. Ohmori's statement only holds true if Game Freak is so insanely incompetent that they're incapable of doing a simple file conversion. I'm aware it's not always a simple one-to-one port or conversion in all cases. I have an example of that as well. When I first load Pikachu in Ohana, he's got some glaring texture mapping issues. After a few tweaks of about 5 minutes max, voila! Pikachu looks significantly better. This only took me 5 minutes as opposed to the 30+ hours of recreating Pikachu from scratch for no logical reason. Game Freak will of course run into hiccups along the way, but every alternative is better in every conceivable way and will always be faster and more efficient compared to remaking the models from scratch. Game Freak made the Pokemon models with the sole intention of using them outside of the 3DS, which we have already proven to be true. This is referred to as future-proofing the models. The Pokemon models were made with much higher quality than what would have been necessary for the 3DS. Before we get into the inherent quality of the models, I would like to highlight the distinction between the terms model and texture, since most uninformed people often use them interchangeably even though they're completely different. The model is the physical body of the character or thing. The texture is the skin or coat of paint that goes on top of the model. You can manipulate the texture without changing the model in any way. I'll show you a quick example. Let's say that we want to turn our Pikachu into a Dittochu. We just need to load up Pikachu's textures in any image editing software, make the edits to the texture, and then load the texture onto the model. We now have a Dittochu instead of a Pikachu. However, the model underneath is the exact same as the other Pikachu. Only Pikachu's texture was altered, not the model. If Ohmori claimed they needed to recreate textures from scratch, that would make a lot more sense, as opposed to recreating the physical model, which makes no sense at all. Model quality can actually be quantified by a numerical value. The polygon or triangle count is generally considered indicative of the quality of the model. These triangles form the 3D mesh of the model. The more triangles generally means the higher quality of the model. Take Mario from Super Mario 64 for example. He is comprised of a total of 838 triangles. Fast forward 21 years to Mario Odyssey, and now Mario is comprised of 14,375 triangles. 17 times more triangles than his N64 counterpart. We will use Odyssey Mario as a benchmark to see how some Pokemon models hold up. Furfrou with the hard haircut has 12,906 triangles. Mega Ampharos has 11,651 triangles. Buzzwole has 10,952 triangles. This is only 3 examples out of over 1,000 models that Game Freak has access to. As you can see, the Pokemon models are of sufficient quality, yet Game Freak claims they are remaking them from scratch despite already successfully porting them onto the Nintendo Switch. This is gross incompetence. The models look the exact same. They share an identical topology. Topology generally refers to the overall layout of the model. The Gyarados from the 3DS games shares an identical layout to the Dynamax Gyarados in Sword and Shield. I also wanted to point out that Dynamax is extremely easy to achieve as well. People believe that the models look the same because they're the same Pokemon. This is completely false. As you can see, you can have the same Pokemon share 2 completely different models. The Gardevoir on the left is from the Chinese mobile game, and the Gardevoir on the right is from Game Freak. You can immediately tell just by looking at it that both models are of Gardevoir, but they're both completely different models entirely. Here's another example with Pikachu, again with the Chinese model on the left and Game Freak model on the right. It's the same Pokemon and you know that it's Pikachu, but you can clearly see that the models are very different. Now I'm not saying that Game Freak can't make changes to their models. In Pokemon Let's Go, Game Freak modified the partner Pikachu model. They added more detail in Pikachu's face by giving it eye sockets and an actual mouth to help it be more expressive. The other Pikachu's mouth and eyes are simply a texture. When put side by side, you can easily see the modifications that Game Freak made. Even though the Let's Go Pikachu is modified, that doesn't mean Game Freak created it from scratch. The rest of the Pikachu model is the exact same, they just worked off of the existing model. If you have a car and you want to add a modification, you won't go and rebuild your car from scratch and then apply the modification on top of it. You wouldn't do that because that would be an extreme waste of time and effort and wouldn't make any sense at all. The same logic applies to the Pokemon models. It would be extremely easy to tell if the models were actually different. Let's take a look at the Gyarados example again. It's actually significantly harder to make a Gyarados from scratch to match up perfectly like this than it would be to make an actual new Gyarados model with noticeable differences. Game Freak would have to seriously go out of their way to make a convincing double of all of their models from scratch just to trick people into believing they're the same. This would be considered gross incompetence. People that defend Game Freak's shortcomings usually state Game Freak has no time or resources to make a good game. Ironically enough, these are the same kinds of people who claim Game Freak now has both the time and resources to build high quality assets that they already have access to, from scratch, for no logical reason. These people fail to see this irony, and they also fail to acknowledge the level of incompetency that is required for Ohmori's statement to be truthful. In fact, a lot of Game Freak defenders were relieved to hear the egregious news of the complete waste of time and resources, instead of being disgusted by the alleged incompetence. Xenochu's comment is the perfect example to show what I'm talking about. I know there's a lot of controversy surrounding this individual, but that's besides the point. Look at how Xenochu reacted after hearing the news that large portions of time and resources were being wasted on assets they already have. He first questions why they look the exact same. His reasoning for this is because they were recreated to look the same, not realizing that to achieve something like this is borderline impossible, certainly not feasible as many Game Freak supporters like to put it. After coming to the sad realization of this time and resource sink, he exclaims, "That explains a lot." Here, Xenochu is ironically referring to the poor quality found in Sword and Shield. He's admitting the game is a mess, and he finally found the perfect reason: severe incompetence. His whole comment comes off as a sigh of relief and jubilation, as opposed to disgust and bewilderment. To get my idea across to you guys, let's consider this bridge analogy. A bridge engineer builds a bridge to be future-proof, so that future generations can also use it. If the bridge fails, people don't flock to the engineer's side saying, "It's very hard to make a bridge," or "You don't know how to make a bridge, so you can't criticize them." No one does that. When the engineers fail at their job, the engineers are condemned, labeled incompetent and unfit for their job, and may even have their licenses revoked. Thankfully, Game Freak's incompetence doesn't actually put any lives at risk, but the same logic still applies. Game Freak is claiming their future-proofed bridges are now all magically broken and need to be rebuilt. When Game Freak fails at their job, the entire Pokemon community should be condemning Game Freak and labeling them as incompetent instead of actively looking for reasons that explains a lot. Reasons that are just excuses for the lack of quality found in Sword and Shield. Well, you guys, that about wraps up my thoughts on the situation. If you think Ohmori lied, or that Game Freak is incompetent, or that this whole situation is one giant misunderstanding, make sure to share those thoughts down below in the comment section. As always, don't settle for less, fight for more. Thanks for watching, you guys.